Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Abel, and I'm this morning's worship partner. The chalice is a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. If you are zooming in and have a chalice, now is a moment to grab it and a match. And I jumped the gun and lit ours here, but you have a moment to light yours at home. And also, for those at home, you can use the chat to post the name of the street where your chalice is being lit. The reading this morning for the chalice was written anonymously. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe and to this community and to each other.
My, but it is good to have you back among us. So just a tiny bit of a shout out before I offer the opening words. I've had the chance to read the 5 p.m. Christmas Eve no rehearsal pageant. Your children and your inner child needs to be part of this. I encourage you strongly to attend both services. They're very different and they're wonderful in very different ways. Our opening words this morning are a little bit on the long side, and they're a bit of a meditation, so I invite you, if you're moved, to lower your gaze or close your eyes. The words are for 5,000 years or more by the Reverend Dr. Matthew Johnson. For 5,000 years or more than 15,000 generations of human beings have been invoking spiritual power. My predecessors and yours have gathered together to make sense of their life and their place in the cosmos. And they have spoken aloud and invited what they conceived of as sacred and powerful to be with them. They called upon the spirits of air and earth, fire and water. They called the bear and the deer. They asked the raven to protect them. They pleaded for the heroes of old to slay the monsters of their fears. They sang songs the way they learned from their grandparents and moved in appointed ways or in ways that were new but felt like the right thing to do. And they imputed power to these spirits and to the memories of the heroes. They called them gods, and they were invoked. Vishnu and Kali, Elohim, Odin, and 100 million others. Every group of people everywhere, they gathered to make sense of their lives and be present to their sense of the place in the cosmos, and they call these spirits to be present to them. And so do we. So do we. It's why we gathered this morning, to make sense of ourselves and the universe in which we live as best we are able. And we call ourselves to worship together, and we invoke the power and the wonder of life itself, to which these spirits of animals and memories of heroes pointed the way. We invoke that power, which we know is always around, always with us, but we sometimes forget about it. We forget that we're part of the whole of creation. We forget that we're stardust. We forget these things, so we invoke the power of existence so that we may remember. So we can lift our eyes and open our ears to the true and the beautiful. For 5,000 years or more, we have done this in many tongues and many ways. And so we continue that ancient tradition in our way, in our time. So let us now worship together. Please rise in body or spirit and join us in hymn number 389, Gathered Here.
Please remain standing for our unison affirmation found in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service our mission. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
I want to say good morning to the congregation as well. I'm Eric Cherry, your interim minister, and it is a joy to be in the congregation with you this morning. Thank you, Reverend DL and Amy and Nonetta, for leading us through the service this morning. I want to share a time for all ages with the congregation this morning. It's based on actual events that happened some years ago in Billings, Montana. And it is a story that has been told in congregation after congregation over the many years since. And this year seems a particularly important time to be telling this story. It's entitled The Christmas Menorahs and How a Town Fought Hate It was written by Janice Cohn, and the illustrations are by Bill Farnsworth. So this took place on a cold December night in Billings, Montana, when Christmas lights twinkled on many houses, and from a few homes, Hanukkah menorahs could be seen shining in the darkness. And it was the third night of Hanukkah, and at Isaac Schnetzer's house, there was a menorah in almost every window. And Isaac was in the den, working on his math homework, and suddenly there was a loud crash. Isaac and Mrs. Davis, his babysitter, ran down the hall, and when they opened the door to Isaac's room, they felt a rush of icy air, and Isaac flipped on the light, and they saw what had happened. A brick had come through Isaac's bedroom window. "My goodness," exclaimed Mrs. Davis, "someone threw this rock at your menorah." Isaac wanted to know who did it and what they should do next, and the babysitter helped to calm his mind, and they called Isaac's parents, and Isaac's parents came home right away and talked about what had happened. Isaac's mom said, "It must have been really scary, honey." And Isaac's dad said, "I had a feeling something like this might happen. There are some terrible people out there who are threatening these days." "Threatening what?" Isaac asked. "Who's threatening?" "Isaac, we'll talk about this in a little while, I promise," his dad told him. "Now your mother and I need to figure out what to do." "We should call the police right away," Isaac's mom insisted. "Chief Inman will come." And indeed, Chief Inman did come to the house, and they had a conversation about what had happened. At first, Isaac's dad suggested that Isaac go to his room while the adults had their conversation, but Isaac listened a little bit from the door to hear what was going on. And when they were talking about the menorahs in the windows, he heard his mother say, "We are not taking down the Hanukkah decorations. Being Jewish is who we are, and we're not going to hide it." "Well, you shouldn't have to," Chief Inman said. "Yet it might be safer. The police will try their best to protect you, but with the holidays here, Jewish families seem to be the target of these people who hate." "I guess that's their idea of getting in the holiday spirit," Isaac's dad murmured angrily. "Throwing rocks through a Jewish kid's bedroom window. It's a twisted way of celebrating," Chief Inman said, shaking his head. And when Isaac heard that, he couldn't help rushing back into the living room and saying, "Someone threw a rock in my window because I'm Jewish?" The chief said, "Yep, I think that's why someone threw the rock. There's a small group of people in Billings who have been causing a lot of trouble that way with hate in recent days." Well, Isaac sat with that for a bit, began to think about it, and at one point he burst out, "Well, let's just put the menorahs away. Then maybe they won't bother us anymore." Well, his dad put his arm around him and said, "I know how you feel. It is frightening. But celebrating Hanukkah is part of being Jewish. It's what we believe in, and we're not about to let some bullies keep us from celebrating our holiday." And ultimately, Isaac agreed that they should certainly not put their menorah away. But they did start talking about what had been happening. Isaac's mother was a guest on a radio program about what had happened in the house, and the community of Billings began to discuss how this terrible event had happened at the house of the Schnetzers. And they began to get some ideas about how they needed to respond and how they might respond. And Ms. McDonald in particular said, "I've been thinking about a story that my parents told me when I was a child. It's about what happened in the country of Denmark during World War II, and it was so inspiring that I've never forgotten it." Some of you may know that story about what happened in Denmark when, in World War II, when the Nazis were terrorizing Jewish people all over the continent. The king of Denmark, King Christian, responded to the rule that Jewish people had to wear a Star of David on their clothing by also wearing a star of clothing in public places when he was out and about. And the Danes became a place of safety for many Jewish people during the war. And Ms. McDonald thought that maybe there was a way that they could take a hint from what had happened in Denmark for their own town. And she spoke with the minister at the Congregational church in town about that, and that maybe they should all put menorahs in their windows and see what happened next. And they reached out to the newspaper in town and said, "Would you all consider putting a story in there about what had happened to our friends, this family, the Schnitzers? And maybe you could even include a picture of a menorah that people could cut out of the newspaper and put in their living room windows." And so that's what the newspaper did, and families all over town had conversations about what Hannukah was. Some of them learned for the first time about this tradition and the miracle that happened, that's celebrated with the menorah each year. And as they filled the town's windows with pictures of menorahs and menorahs with candles lit during the next 5 nights, the town felt that they had come together in an important way to say that here in our town, this kind of hate does not have a place. And they came to see that their own Hannukah miracle had taken place by the response that they had made. May it not only be so in Billings, Montana, but in every town where anti-Semitism raises its face. Let's always be a place where there is no room for hate in East Greenwich and our surrounding communities. May it be so this year and every year. And at this time, I'd like to invite the children to head on up to their religious education classes, and we'll join together in singing them out to their classes. The words for the children's recessional will appear on the screen. As you journey,
Good morning. My name is Kamila Bajakovsky, and I am a lay pastoral care associate, along with Meg Carroll, Sue Bolins, and Rob DeLong. Reverend Eric is available for pastoral counseling for you just about all the time. But if you just want to speak to someone, you need an ear to listen and someone who will give you support without advice and without commentary, just a ear to listen, please call upon us. Our contact information is in the chat, and it's also on the website, and it's on your order of service. So, as we gather in community, we carry life's hurts and its great joys, recognizing that joys shared are multiplied and hurts shared can be lightened. I will read the joys and sorrows that have been written down for us. And
So, a bit of a prayer of love and support today. This is a time of year when there is celebration, but there's also a bit of forced celebration. There's an expectation that you're happy. And in that expectation that you're happy, it doesn't always make room for those of us that are grieving or have experienced a loss or for whom these holidays are immensely complicated. So I offer simply a prayer of love, of remembering that you are not alone, even when you are alone. A prayer of remembering that reaching out and letting someone else know what you need is love. That reaching out to someone who might be in need is love. And in that way, we travel together as we have for 5,000 years or more. May it be so. And I'm supposed to tell you to please remain seated and join us in hymn number 123, Spirit of Life.
Now would have been the time in our service for our stewardship testimonial by Amy Prisco. Unfortunately, her family is suffering, as so many are, with the flu. It was my big idea to have an all Amy testimonial over the course of our annual budget drive. I gave mine a couple weeks ago, and then we were going to have Amy Prisco here today. But Amy Crawford hopefully will be here next week for that. But our pledge drive continues, and the easiest way is to go online, and there's a donation button for the annual budget drive, just so everybody aware that it is still going on. And now the time in our service for our offering. UU churches are built on congregational, I have a mental block about this word, polity, thank you. Which means, if you didn't know what I didn't know, which means it is the people who create this place, sustain this place, and live the values of this place. One way that we can sustain this congregation and live our values is to take a morning offering in which we share with a different organization each month that does good works in the community. Westminster's Share the Plate for December is Community Music Works. Community Music Works' mission is to create a comprehensive urban community through music education and performance that transforms the lives of children, families, and musicians. Their model is centered around the teaching, mentoring, program design, and performance activities of its musicians and residents. The Music Works Collaborative. Community Works students live predominantly in Providence's South Side neighborhoods. They receive instruments free of charge and participate in a variety of activities, including lessons, studio classes, and workshops. CMW is founded on the commitment to social justice. And to donate, click www.westminsteruu.org/donate. The other half of the offering goes to support all the good works of this congregation. And we will now give and receive the morning offering.
So we're going to do the same thing we did last week, and we're going to skip over the reading that precedes the sermon. But I promise you, it's a good choice. So I got here this morning, and the first thing I said to Reverend Eric is I forgot my menorah. Fortunately, he had a backup menorah. And I want to acknowledge that today is not Hannukah in any way. The 8 nights of Hannukah begins next Sunday evening, December 18th. But I won't be with you then, so we're going to talk about Hannukah today. I think we're going to talk about it again a little next week, but I'll begin by acknowledging that I'm a Jewish UU, or a Junitarian, as some of us call ourselves. And I want to precede this by I am not equating Hannukah with Christmas. They are not similarly important holidays, despite the cultural relevance put upon them sometimes in today's world. But they are connected messages in history, and they both lay the groundwork for our understanding of our present and our place in the arc of history. So I want to begin with a little bit of history itself, as told by our UUA president, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray. Long ago, in 2nd century BCE, over 2,200 years ago, Israel and Jerusalem had been taken over by Syrian occupiers. The Syrian Empire was ruled by Antiochus Epiphanes, and they were working on expanding their empire. In doing so, their motive, their focus was wiping out other religions and other cultures. In Israel, they tried to completely wipe out the Jewish religion. All those who did not give up the practice of faith for the religion and philosophy of the Syrian Greek culture which included worshiping the political rulers as gods, sounds familiar, were beaten or lost their lives. Some people did resist the takeover of the Syrians, and in particular, there was a great priestly leader, Matthias, who refused to perform the Syrian rituals and stood up to the occupiers. With the military leadership of his son Judah, and his 4 other sons, they led a group of freedom fighters, who we now know as the Maccabees, and they waged a 3-year war against the Syrians. And though they were greatly outnumbered, the Maccabees recaptured Jerusalem, liberated the temple, and drove the Syrians from all of ancient Israel and reasserted Jewish sovereignty throughout the land. When the Maccabees retook Jerusalem, they demolished the altar inside the temple. They considered this a false altar, and they built a new one. They discarded the defiled objects and they replaced them, and once the temple was clean and ready, they decided to rededicate it with an 8-day celebration. And in restoring the temple, they found a small amount of consecrated oil that had not been polluted. It was enough oil to last 1 day. They could make more oil, but it would take at least a week before it was ready. And they had fought so hard to reclaim their temple, and they didn't want to wait. And so reluctantly, the priests went ahead and lit the lamps for that day's worship, knowing that it would only last 1 day. Miraculously, as we now know, the priest went to check the lamps on the 2nd day and found there was oil enough for that day's celebration. Also on the 3rd day, and all the way through the 8-day celebration, this oil, which should only have been enough for 1 day, lasted for 8. And this, my friends, this is the version of Hannukah told. And in many congregations, in many places, this is where the story would end. And it's a good story. But I don't think it would be completely accessible to a lot of Unitarian Universalists, particularly not those of Jewish heritage, or those for whom the notion of miracles feels harder to accept. It's asking for a leap to some sort of acceptance of an externalized divinity, some bearded God in the sky. And for many of you, I know that's not your understanding of the world. There's more to the Hannukah story than meets the eye, though. And it's what I'd call the very human side of miracle making, a notion that perhaps you might relate to. So we're told that these 8 days happened because of those freedom fighters who fought for religious freedom. But those fighters were themselves part of a longer arc of a Jewish heritage and a much longer struggle for freedom from oppression. But it isn't even just about the plight of the Jews, but a tale of so many who have struggled against those who would persecute them for their very existence. The human heart is stronger than that. In a community, whether that community is freedom fighters or a congregation such as this one, freedom is sometimes suddenly within one's grasp. For Hannukah, I think that the miracle is that the persistence was enough to remove the oppressors and for the Jews to reinstall their own religious practices. But even that isn't really a miracle, because it's a very human-made one. Little bit of a scripture lesson for you. There's 3 kinds of miracles in the Bible, in my opinion. 1, God performs a miracle without human interaction. 2, humans perform a miracle without God's help. 3, they work together. I'd file Hannukah in category number 3. Christmas too, but I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'll leave that to Rev Eric. Pick any social movement, any one that matters to you. The end of slavery, the suffrage movement, the civil rights, marriage equality, you name it, and you will find the exact same pattern. People work for years tirelessly and often unnoticed to create these systemic changes, and eventually their collective power shifts the larger universe. And then everyone who hasn't been part of the fight looks at that shift and says, look at that miracle. The miracle is the power and dedication of individuals and communities who work tirelessly for change, not from a miracle on high, or at least not alone. So many miracles, I'm unsure about the 8 days of light. Many can be traced back to human interactions. There's an older book that maybe some of you have read, Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. I got a lot of nods. And this book asks that same question, what makes change begin to happen? And he concludes that what appears like dramatic change is actually an accumulation of many small moments of these so-called tipping points. Interestingly, he also studied pandemics to understand the moment in which a pandemic reaches its critical mass and begins to spread at a much higher rate. But I feel like we've lived through that and we don't need to look back on it. But the idea is a compelling one nonetheless. Our actions are woven into the larger whole, and we move ever closer or further together away from that or towards that tipping point. We create and we co-create in both the mundane and critical of times. And one day, maybe I'll have time to teach you about process theology, which is just about this, but I'll leave that alone too. That's the core of Hannukah. It reminds us of our power and our endurance, that when everything seems lost, when everything seems skewed against survival, we are not without options, and we are not without means to create change. Change that benefits everyone, whether that whole is the congregation, this community, or this state, or the larger world. Hannukah also reminds us that if we keep faith and we keep going, miracles happen. People are freed. Medicine ends pandemics. Hope is restored. That's the promise of this season and of this faith, that what we work for will be manifested, and the change beyond our wildest dreams still remains possible. I can't be here in person. I might join by Zoom next week for the solstice celebration. And then again on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, because we continue to encounter this multiplicity of reminders of the miraculous human and sometimes otherworldly ways that we create our own future. May we be then renewed by this faith, and may it lead us ever closer to the miracles that we dream of. May it be so. Please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us. I don't know where we stand on the holding hands thing, but as you're comfortable, take each other's hands. O Spirit that moves in all things, great mystery, whose reach spans beyond the coldest edges of our universe, and yet is present within the vast subatomic emptiness coursing through every fiber and every breath of our being. Help us to see the miracles in the mundane, to see the crystal stars, the shape-shifting clouds, the patient trees, to see each other with fresh eyes, for it is so easy to forget what we truly are and what we've been given as we move through our lives. Let us remember to see the miracles in the mundane and to perceive the common substance that gives birth to our myriad forms. As we work for peace and fight for justice, while always informed by a spirit of compassion, may we hold close to each other. And may it be so. Amen. Please join us for Carry the Flame.